Welcome to the final stewardship series of 2022. This program started in 2017 with a basic set of training covering forestry, trail building, and invasive species geared towards volunteers. After much success and general interest from the public, we continued and expanded the series, each year offering a different set of topics in regards to Little Forks programs, the environment, wildlife, and land management that can be utilized by volunteers, landowners, both rural and city, and anyone looking to learn more. You go to the next one. Little Forks Conservancy began its conservation efforts in the Tittabawassee River watershed in 1996. This year, we are honoring our 25th anniversary. Little Forks' mission is to permanently protect and improve natural environments in mid-Michigan by leading and inspiring actions that conserve vital habitats and waterways for the benefit of our entire community. We use these 4 key action words to guide our work by protecting private land through conservation easements, improve the natural landscapes on the land we own and through partnerships. We lead community members in the latest conservation practices, and we hope to inspire you all to protect and improve your community in any way that you can. Today we have Huron Pines AmeriCorps member Erin Dodd talking about bird migration, and I'll let her introduce herself.
I'm Erin Dodd. I'm the Huron Pines AmeriCorps member, as Sarah said. I studied biology and environmental science from Miami University in Ohio. And while I was at Miami University, I took an ornithology class that I really loved. And then just for fun, on this slide, I included some of my favorite birding photos. All right, so today I'm just gonna briefly cover bird migration and migration flyways, monitoring migration movement, why and how people do that, using eBird, and some bird watching tips for any beginner birders out there. So when you talk about bird migration, this bird comes up very frequently. This is an Arctic tern. Out of all the bird species that migrate, they travel the farthest from their Arctic breeding grounds to Antarctica every year. So at least 40% of bird species migrate. 340 of these species are neotropical migrants. This is according to the Neotropical Bird Conservation Act. These birds breed in North America and then fly south in the fall for the winter, and many of them are songbirds. And as to why birds migrate, mostly to take advantage of seasonally abundant food and increase their breeding success. So this is kind of an overview of the main migration paths that birds take, or migratory bird flyways. As you can see, they can span great distances and over different continents. And then to just kind of zoom in to the neotropical migrants, you can see there are about 4 main migration flyways in North America and South America. And Michigan is a really interesting place to birdwatch because it kind of overlaps the Atlantic flyway and the Mississippi flyway. They cover great distances, and you might wonder, how do birds know where to go? For birds that are traveling short distances, they tend to follow older birds to get to where they're supposed to go. But for long distance migrants, there's a genetic component because they're born knowing where to go, where to fly. So just another way to kind of visualize how much these birds are working in order to migrate. The Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center made this chart, and you can see kind of on the low end, some like the American red star might travel like 20 miles a day. And then you can get into birds traveling over 100 miles a day for their migration route. So an interesting thing about bird migration, birds actually migrate at night and then rest and eat during the day. This might be to reduce predation or the cooler temperatures might help the birds regulate their body temperature. Unfortunately, light pollution can affect the birds that are migrating. Safe Passage is one program that tries to educate people about good practices during migration. Keeping outdoor lights off and turning lights off above the 5th floor can help these birds. Knowing that birds rest during the day is also important when you're bird watching, because you want to avoid flushing these birds. They've already spent so much energy traveling all night. You don't want to keep flushing them when you try to get close to them, because they're just going to waste a bunch of energy. So as I briefly mentioned before, in Michigan, in the Great Lakes region, the Atlantic and Mississippi flyways kind of overlap, and over 350 bird species fly through the Great Lakes region. Just some general things to look forward to in migration in Michigan generally between March and May. When ice starts to break up, that's a great time to look for waterfowl. In March, that's when you start seeing early arrivals like red-winged blackbirds. Spring equinox can bring tree swallows and killdeer. And then in April, you start seeing sparrows and kinglets, loons and hummingbirds. And then now, at peak migration, you start seeing the warblers and orioles. So next part of the presentation will be about why and how people monitor this migration. So one really popular method is through bird banding. So people go out, set up mist nets usually, and catch songbirds through there and band them. You can see in this chart, this is bird bandings from 1960 forward. Well over, like half of it is just songbirds, but then there's also quite a few ducks that are banded. And so when the birds are banded, some morphometric measurements are taken and data is collected on the birds in subsequent years that it's caught. On average, about 1.2 million birds are banded and 87,000 resightings happen every year. Some other popular methods is going out and doing breeding bird surveys. So on the left here is a photo of survey routes for the breeding bird survey. People go out, try to find as many species as they can. And then on the right here is a sandhill crane. And within the red circle is a GPS transmitter, and it's actually solar powered. So the refuge biologist who works with these cranes puts on these GPS transmitters, and I think he gets the data like a couple times a day on where the birds he banded are, which is very expensive and high tech. Most bird bandings do not use GPS transmitters. And then as for why we track these birds, this data helps scientists understand which areas are a priority for conservation efforts, where to expect different species, how common they should be, and it just establishes the baseline for these bird populations. So for example, these birds travel quite a bit. If you're just protecting your breeding grounds and not their wintering grounds, you might not be effectively conserving these species. Something scientists have noticed since monitoring these birds is about 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970. Another way to think of that is 1 in 4 are gone. And something interesting about this finding, it's not just rare birds that are declining, common birds are also declining. But with like concentrated conservation efforts, there are some success stories. This here is a flamingo, obviously. In 1950, there were about 5,000 wild flamingos in North America. Scientists tried to figure out the best breeding grounds to protect, and they established a national park in the Bahamas. And today there are over 70,000 flamingos. This particular flamingo is the oldest known wild flamingo. It's 49 years old, and it was identified through banding records. Another success story is the Kirtland warbler. After 52 years on the endangered species list, it was taken off in 2019. By studying Kirtland warblers, scientists realized that there were 2 pressures on Kirtland warblers. One was that there weren't enough young jack pine stands to support the population, and also that brown-headed cowbirds were disrupting their breeding. So brown-headed cowbirds are parasitic. They lay nests in other birds' species nests and remove the Kirtland warbler eggs. And so scientists made effort to keep some young jack pine plantation habitat, and then also try to control brown-headed cowbird populations. So in 1993, the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center established International Migratory Bird Day to kind of highlight these bird species. It was specifically focusing on like North and South America. And so it established the days for the second Saturday in May and October. It's since expanded to World Migratory Bird Day. Some places don't celebrate it on these dates though, since migration can change between different areas. And there's a special emphasis on spring because birds are in their summer breeding plumage and they're singing their unique songs. So the bird pictured here is an American goldfinch. They're both American goldfinches, but the top one is in its non-breeding plumage and the bottom one is in its breeding plumage. So obviously it's much easier to spot this bright yellow bird than the brown one. And that's why going birding for spring can be a lot more fun and it can help people kind of dip their toes into birding. So how can you participate in monitoring migration efforts as a citizen scientist? eBird was started by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's an app and a website, and they're celebrating their 20th anniversary this year. It's a citizen science tool to submit checklists for living wild birds. So this tracks bird distribution, abundance, habitat use, and other trends. Checklists include lots of information like location and date and time, but most importantly includes all the bird species encountered and a number of each species that's seen. This data does get checked for mistakes. So adding photos, videos, notes, things to your checklist can help improve the integrity of your checklist and of eBird altogether. eBird is used worldwide, and at the bottom of this slide here, I have some of eBird's stats. There's been over 66.7 million checklists, and there's over 776,000 eBirders. And then this photo on the right is from when I participated in a global big day in 2018. You can see that, you can see the track I took, how long I was out there. I saw 35 species and 350 individuals. So it's really nice to go back and look through past checklists. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology had been doing big days since 1985. Big days are when people go out and try to find as many bird species as possible. In 2015, the lab decided to expand by also including public participation through eBird. This artwork on the right of the slide is actually from 2015 when they started to expand. And it's been very popular. Last year, there was over 1 billion observations. And big days can also be really helpful for fundraising goals. So now I'm gonna leave the PowerPoint to go to eBird. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. All right, so when you get to eBird, this is the desktop version. The app does look a little different and it's more helpful for like submitting checklists, but the desktop is really nice for some of the other resources eBird has. So right now we're gonna go through some of the things you can find under exploring eBird. So one thing I really like is that you can sign up for you can sign up for alerts, and this will tell you when there are rare birds in the area and send it to your email address. you keep scrolling, there's also a photo and sound quiz through eBird. So this can help you become more familiar with the birds in your area. You can do it by location, you can do it by a specific date or by year round, and you can practice becoming familiar with what birds look like as well as what they sound like. Another really helpful thing in eBird is you can explore hotspots. Hotspots are locations where there are lots of checklists gathered together. So if I scroll down to Michigan, I'm just going to go to the Chippewa Nature Center hotspot, and you click on it. It will tell you which bird species are at that hotspot, what was most recently seen, and how many species have been observed there, and the number of checklists. You can even, if you want to view the entire year laid out, there are these weekly bar charts or monthly bar charts that show you when to expect certain species at Chippewa Nature Center. If you're interested in a particular species, you can also type that into Explorer. So when you go to a species page, they will have several different photos to help you learn how to identify them. They will go through some of their other identifying features. They have recordings you can listen to, and then they also have a range map. The darker the shade of purple, the more heavily their abundance is. And they also have a bar chart you can look at based on region. So after going through the Explore tab, I'm going to go to My eBird. When you create an eBird account, you'll be able to do this. But this tab is useful for managing your checklist and kind of seeing how many species you yourself have observed. So if you submit a checklist through the app and you're like, I need to add some photos, or I wrote something down wrong, you can go to My Checklists and fix it. This is also where you can share checklists. So if you're in a big group of people and you're all bird watching together, instead of each of you submitting a checklist, you can share checklists. But let's say you want to submit a checklist. So you can just type in the general area you were in and then zoom in. It'll show popular hotspots, and then you can also create new locations for your checklist. It'll ask you for the date, and the app does this as well. And it'll ask you what kind of observation you're doing. So I'd say the two most popular are traveling and stationary. Traveling is just what it sounds like. You're walking a trail, or you're driving in a car, and you're in the field moving while you're watching birds. So it'll just ask you the distance you cover, or if you're using the app, it'll just follow the distance you covered and calculate that for you. And then if you're not moving and you're just like watching a bird feeder or something, you can just hit stationary. Incidental is like when you're not planning to go birding, but you see a bird and you want to submit it as a checklist. So one nice thing about eBird is it'll often flag common mistakes. So like right here, I put the start time as 12:23 in the morning, and it said that's a nocturnal observation. Are you sure that's right? So then once you get to the checklist, you can click on the birds you've seen. You can also search for species so you don't have to scroll down the long list. And you can also search for species by banding code. And when you enter how many you've seen, you can add other details. And that's just where you add photos and any videos or anything else you want to add. And then after you submit all of the birds you've seen, it'll ask you if it's a complete checklist. A complete checklist is if you try to identify every single bird you've seen and you write it all down. Even if you see like a duck and you're not sure what kind and you just write down like you saw a duck species, that still counts as a complete list because you filled it out to the best of your ability. An incomplete checklist would be like if you were just searching for bluebirds and you only put down bluebirds in your checklist. So then you would submit it. I'm obviously not going to do that since I didn't do this checklist. And then one cool thing about eBird that's kind of new is you can create, one second. Oh, you can create trip reports. So if you went on a trip somewhere for like a few days, you can group all the checklists together and then you can kind of have an overview of what that trip consisted of. Like you saw 44 species, you had 6 checklists, which is kind of nice. I kind of think of it as like a scrapbook. And then I'm going to go ahead and exit eBird now and go back to the PowerPoints. So just a recap of what we covered in eBird. We explored hotspots and species information, email alerts, photo and sound quiz options to learn more about birds in your areas, creating and submitting checklists, and creating trip reports. So now I just want to.
We can see the presenter view. I just want to let you know.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see my screen? Oh, sorry. Okay, how's that?
You're good.
Okay. So just some bird watching tips for any new birders out there who want to participate in Global Big Day. One tip is to go birding with other people. It's really helpful when you have others with you, just in terms of they might catch something you didn't catch, or you can come to a consensus about what a bird species is. I also really like bird watching tours that kind of take you off the beaten path. This is a photo I took from a boat tour. And like, if I hadn't taken a boat tour, I probably wouldn't have noticed. I wouldn't have gotten that close to the heron and noticed it. And then something that's really helpful to have while you're out birding is a field guide. I really like National Geographic. They have a good field guide. This is Sibley Birds. They have an app that's also really nice. Apps of field guides are really nice because they often have audio recordings of the birds, so you can listen to it while you're in the field. In terms of free apps, there's the Merlin ID app from the Cornell app. This is really nice for true beginners because it can lead you through a series of questions to kind of narrow down what bird it is you saw. You can also submit photos and sounds to kind of see if it can identify it. I will say for people who aren't beginners, the field guides are probably more helpful because you probably already know what you're deciding between for what species it is. And then when you're bird watching, it's helpful to know the different parts of a bird so you can know what diagnostic features to look out for and how to describe what you're seeing. So here's just a chart with some basic ones like wing bars, whether a bird has a crest, which is just feathers that come off the top of their head, whether they have eye rings, the rump is like the spot where their tail meets their body. That can be diagnostic. So just knowing how to describe the birds you've seen can be really helpful. So just to kind of like practice, if I had to describe these birds, I'd probably describe the one on the left as like having a gray head and back, tail, with like a yellow belly and throat, with some black spots around the upper chest, while the scarlet tanager on the right is just a red bird with black wings and a tail. But when the birds start looking more similar, you have to go into more detail. So here we have a Kirtland's warbler on the right. If I were looking at both of these species and I had to describe them, I'd probably say the Kirtland's warbler, instead of having the spotting on their lower throat, they have spotting along their wings, and they don't have any yellow by their eyes. I don't have a camera, so I don't use a camera while I go bird watching. So in eBird, I just try to be really detailed with my descriptions. You don't need a nice camera and nice photos in order to enjoy birding and submit checklists. But it is interesting when you come across birds that don't look like you think they should, whether it's because the light is low and like different colors look different shades, or maybe the bird is leucistic, so it just has reduced pigmentation. Sometimes you'll run across birds where having a photo is really nice. This is a yellow cardinal from 2018. It's just a genetic mutation that caused this. And eBird does flag unusual observations, but it's usually because it's a rarity or it's out of season or it's a really high count. So in addition to looking at birds and noticing their features, their physical features, listening for birds is really important. Bird vocalizations can be another diagnostic feature. So bird vocalizations can be split into songs, which are more complex and you associate them with breeding birds, and then calls, which are shorter sounds. So like a really famous call you probably all know is the black-capped chickadee's chickadee-dee-dee. And then putting words to these calls is really helpful for remembering them. So from some of the song examples I put up here are the towhees, drink your tea, and the northern parula's the Z up. But you have to be careful when you're listening for bird vocalizations because there are some mimics out there. Blue jays often imitate hawks, so that's something to keep in mind. Some other birding vocab that can be helpful while you're out there. Grounding and fallouts are when there's a weather event preventing birds from reaching their destination, so they're kind of stuck there and you can go watch them. Stopovers are where birds rest while they're going down their migration flyway. And then vagrants are birds found outside of its range. Vagrants usually come in because of like weird weather patterns. My ornithology professor always said that bad weather is good birding. So then I kind of collected some resources that might be helpful for all of you. Bird Academy is a nice website that has interesting free and paid courses. So I have a screenshot on the lower right that kind of has some examples. There's one about how woodpeckers avoid brain injury. There's a class to kind of help you learn how to identify bird songs, and they just have really interesting stuff all the time. Chippewa Valley Audubon Club is the closest Audubon chapter to Midland, in case you want to go birding with someone or check out their Facebook. Birdcast is a really cool website that kind of forecasts bird migration. So here's another screenshot from their website. I went on there last night and they have live information for how many birds are crossing. And then they also have expected migrants that night. So I kind of outlined in yellow 2 species, rose-breasted grosbeak and gray catbird. Yesterday I was out at one of Little Forks preserves and I saw both of these birds. And then last night I saw they were on the expected nocturnal migrants. So it seems like Birdcast is pretty accurate to me. It's a pretty cool website. So Randy Krasinski has put together a lot of birding locations specific to Midland County. He's attending this session right now as well. So thanks to Randy Krasinski for providing these birding locations and some descriptions about them, such as whether they have parking. But he was willing to share these documents with people who attended tonight. So I will send out these maps and their descriptions at the end of the night tonight to people who registered. And then some other upcoming events near World Migratory Bird Day. There's going to be a Chippewa Nature Center naturalist leading a bird and blooms hike May 15th at 1 p.m. at Forest View Natural Area. Forest View is one of the Little Forks Conservancy properties. And then May 13th through May 15th, Chippewa Nature Center is also having a lot of bird banding observation events. Bird banding is always really fun. I highly recommend it. And then also May 13th to May 15th, this is further away, but the Tawas Point State Park is providing tours from local guides throughout that weekend. So I talked about bird banding a lot, so I just thought I would end on this kind of cool fact. This is the oldest known wild bird that's been banded. This is Wisdom. She is an albatross who is 70 years old. She actually outlived the biologist who banded her. And then I just wanted to ask if anyone had any questions. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. And if anyone has any other bird watching tips or fun events they want to share, feel free.
Well, if you want to go to the Chippewa Valley Audubon Club meeting for this month, it's tonight at 7. So I'll be leaving in about a half hour or so. It's at the main library in Mount Pleasant.
How does someone join the club for the Audubon Society?
Well, the club itself, you just pay them $10 and you're a member. We're not, I mean, we're associated with the state and national, but there's not a lot of interaction between the two. We're pretty independent. And also, I would say of our programs during the year, we only have 2 or 3 on birds. We cover all aspects of nature. We've had astronomy, fish. I did my beach rock ID program there once, so you never know what's gonna show up each year. We also do field trips and stuff like that.
Well, thanks to everyone who attended the stewardship series tonight. And thanks for explaining more about joining the Chippewa Valley Audubon Club, Randy.
Well, with that, we'll let you guys get back to your evening. We'll send the link out to this recording and all the good information that Erin shared with us today.